Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media. Step into the world of farmers from diverse backgrounds across Australia. Through intimate interviews, host Darren Grigg delves into farming practices, traditions, and the challenges farmers face in nurturing the land.
What we wanted to do was find ways of getting deeper rooted perennial grasses into the system so that you could still graze them and be productive, but you had a deeper root zone and you had a bigger bucket of soil that you could, draw water out of. And therefore, if you can keep the water tables low, you can keep the salt out of the root zone.
Today, we head north of Holbrook, New South Wales, where Dr. Alison Southwell and her husband Dan are cropping and running Merinos. We're joined by Alison, a woman with an incredible depth of knowledge and expertise, a highly respected figure in the field. Alison's background includes a PhD on native grassland ecophysiology, tackling the critical issue of salinity at a time when it was a major concern. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the importance of getting deeper rooted grasses into our farming systems and why agriculture needs a systems approach to thrive. We'll talk about soil profiles, no-till and no-herbicide, why ground cover is a key priority, and the dream of perennial pastures across the entire farm. Alison also gives us an inside look at the challenges of growing fine wool. Plus, we get some fascinating insights into the future of farming. And as always, we'll throw in a few off-the-wall questions, and these can get a little bit crazy. Let's get into it. Good morning, Alison.
Good morning.
Alison, can you tell me where are we and what sort of country are we on here?
We are just outside Mangapla, between Mangapla and Pulitop, on the southern side of Livingstone National Park on Wiradjuri country. Up on a hill, looking down across the paddocks and across towards, Nest Hill in the distance and some rolling hills countryside in between.
It's a stunning place you're on, and I really love a long driveway and to be able to cross a creek and nearly drive off the bridge actually, looking at the creek. It's stunning what you've got here.
Yeah, the bridges are a little bit of a challenge, but when the creek's flowing well, it's pretty nice down at the first one there.
How long have you been here?
We've been here almost 10 years. We came here in 2016. It was just a 500 acre block. It was, an oversized hobby farm, but we had to start somewhere with farming, and so we got this, and it was cheaper than a fancy house in Wagga, so it seemed like a good idea, and we tidied it up a little bit and started our own little farming journey.
I love it. So has sheep farming been in your family for long?
6 generations. I'm the 6th.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where did they start farming?
So all my family came out. Well, I think the 2 brothers came out on the 6th fleet and they settled around the Queanbeyan, Burrawa, Canberra region and, all started farming. So there's some ridiculous number of Southwells in Australia.
Really?
Mm.
And were they wool farmers?
Yeah. I think everyone in those early days were wool producers. I guess, yeah. So I got the bug from Dad and my grandfather and... they're a lot of work, Merinos, but there's not much nicer than a nice piece of wool, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
And are they still farming now?
Dad is, and he's retiring though. He's leasing part of his farm now, and we've leased it in the past as well to get going ourselves when we purchased the flock off him. Yeah, just doing little bits he is now. He's well and truly into retirement.
Have you heard of any interesting stories from those early days?
Yeah, stories about taking rams to the show in the back of the car and things like that. Yeah, back in the pound for a pound days. And Dad's got a few pictures of some prize-winning rams in big picture frames on the wall, and oh my God, they're ugly. They are so wrinkly and everything else. You wouldn't put them in the show these days, no.
So you grew up on the land. Have you got any interesting memories as a child?
Oh yeah, look, I think growing up on a farm's the best life you can have as a kid.
Yeah.
Just everything from I don't know, just taking off down the paddock, really, you know, rolling paddy melons down the hill, building fortresses out of the rocks, going snake hunting down the creek. Once you find them, everything's fine, you know. Yeah, look, I loved being outside as a kid and loved helping on the farm. And so it was I think I decided in about year 10 that, you know, I was going to get into ag. I liked ag and science, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Do you find having conversations these days about people bringing up TV shows back when you were a kid and you don't know what they're talking about? Because as soon as you got home from school, you were out in the land, weren't you?
Yeah, I had two brothers who were very different to me, so they watched a lot more TV probably than I did. But I guess there wasn't as many TV shows to watch back then.
No.
So, you know, you got the basics, and yeah, but I often wasn't inside before the news at night.
No,
So,
I was the same. Glass of cordial, 2 biscuits, straight out to find Dad.
Yep.
So you left school and studied, and you now have a PhD in native grassland ecophysiology. This sounds fascinating. Have I got that right?
You have got that right.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, look, well, I finished university up at University of New England. I did a raw science degree up there, and I'd done honours. And before I left, my supervisor and mentor, old Professor Wal Whaley, he was a native pasture expert, and our farm was very much native pastures where we were at Yass. It was not really that much improved country. And he said to me, you know, academia is a bit like sport. If you're good at it, see how far you can go. And I went, oh, okay. So the opportunity I came across an opportunity to do a PhD with the plant-based management of dryland salinity, CRC it was called back then, or salinity CRC for short. And at that point, salinity was a big issue, and all the questions were around, particularly in the high rainfall zone, how do we manage recharge?
So salinity across rangelands or in the Yass area?
Look, you can find it anywhere, but in the high rainfall zone, you'd get outbreaks, breaker slope and bottom of the slope, and basically it was where the water tables were rising up and bringing salts with it to the surface, and then therefore killing off plants. And so what we wanted to do was find ways of getting deeper rooted perennial grasses into the system so that you could still graze them and be productive, but you had a deeper root zone and you had a bigger bucket of soil that you could, you know, draw water out of. And therefore, if you can keep the water tables low, you can keep the salt out of the root zone. So my work was looking at different native pastures and their rooting depths and their compositions, and whether they were C3 or C4, which is about their photosynthetic pathways, and looking at how much recharge you could get from those pastures. And so there was a little bit of modelling in there. There was a lot of field work, long-term trials, a lot of pasture cuts and sticking things through a leaf area meter to figure out leaf area indexes and things like that. So yeah, it was all about understanding these pasture systems and how they use water, basically.
Wow. And then you went on to lecture at CSU, did you, for a while?
Yeah, before I finished my PhD, I was given a job lecturing in agricultural systems and extension.
Yeah.
Because I was from a farm and because I'd had a bit to do within industry prior to that, and because I was probably a junior staff member, I got also the work experience component of it, and I loved that because one of the best things was actually working with students and helping them find opportunities to try new careers in agriculture, because when I first got there, they thought they could be a farmer or an agronomist, and that was about it. And so we embarked on a mission to make sure that they knew that there was a plethora of careers in agriculture that they could actually get into. And so that was a bit of fun.
And you've had an interesting career so far. You've had 19 years as an ag scientist.
Yes. Different roles within that time, but yeah, lecturing in different subjects. I've lectured in pastures and systems and course director in there for some of it as well, writing the ag science degree at Charles Sturt.
So over this last 20 years, are we changing and are we getting better control methods and better soil health?
I think we are. I think we are. I mean, when I started, the idea of no-till farming was really just emerging. 90% of farmers do it now. And it's now to the point where there's been such a culture shift that the idea of cultivation is foreign. You know, it's a complete flip. It's probably one of the most successful conservative farming practices that we've instilled. But we're also learning a lot more about how you've got to have multiple tools in the toolkit, because as soon as you go to no-till systems, then you've got high reliance on chemical fallows to be able to manage weeds, and you've also got different layers, stratification of soil down the profile. What happened with the tilling was that within the 10 centimetres or so that was tilled, you had a mixing of the soil, and so you had that distribution of nutrients throughout that soil. And so when you take that away and everything's going on the top, you get a high amount at the top and less as you go down. And so we're finding now that, you know, we've got subsurface soil acidity issues, and we've got stratification of phosphorus and other nutrients down the profile. And if we want to keep, you know, our systems productive, we actually have to look at how we manage that. So, you know, it's been interesting. We've gone from tilling as a weed control method and a standard seed preparation, you know, sowing method, to no tilling, and now we're actually looking at strategic till in some systems. You know, not every year, absolutely not.
But only a shallow till?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the level of stratification and pH of soil and things like that. So, you know, and of course, whether or not that soil is actually appropriate to do that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've also got hard pan layers and things happening from continuously going to the same depth. So there's a lot of things that you've got to be careful of. And I think that's, you know, there's always something to learn in agriculture. You fix one problem and something else pops up, and you really do need a systems approach to how you do agriculture. It's not black and white. You can't just apply a recipe. It's a number of things you've got to do.
Is it nearly impossible then to do no-till and no chemicals? Like, I was on a tractor last Friday and I was turning over the soil to kill off a whole heap of weeds and introduce species. But it felt like I was going to burn that soil and maybe disturb the fungi and upset all that. But we didn't want to put chemicals on it either. It's a bit of a juggle, isn't it?
It is. Look, and there's a lot we don't know about soil microbiology yet. Soils are pretty resilient, really, and the biology that's in it is a response to what you're doing to it. Look, I think you possibly can have no-till and no herbicide. It's about ground cover. Yeah. And more importantly, it's about managing that weed seed bank. So you can't just turn off the tap for those things and expect it to work. It's about population management, really.
So you're still enjoying your research into pasture management?
Yes, it's my little favourite thing to do, although I live vicariously through staff to do it these days.
So you and your husband, Dan, have taken on one of the biggest challenges, and that's being a self-starter. You've bought this property and a couple of others. Being a self-starter must be nearly impossible these days.
Yeah. It is. It's the perennial juggle of doing too many things at once. It'd be lovely if I could just focus on farming. I might get my timing right and have more time to do my benchmarking and researching and my farm business management and all the rest of it. But when you're running two other businesses and have a young family at the same time, sometimes you've just got to accept that you're not going to get it perfect. But it is a tough thing, and we wouldn't be able to do it if we weren't supplementing the farm with other income. You know, we're effectively trying to have our off-farm income cover our living expenses and the farm pay for itself, and the other business help build the farm up as well. So, you know, we just have to look at the prices that we've paid for the land that we're on here, and in the last 10 years, it's probably gone up 6 times.
Wow.
So yeah, it would be at least 500%, I would think. It's about trying to get in and get something and keep building on it. And we just have to accept that we can't afford the land that's been well looked after, that we're getting the stuff that are fixer-uppers, if you know what I mean, and that we're not going to be getting it 100% right straight away, and we can only do what we can do.
Such a gutsy move, and with young kids and a growing family, a big challenge for you. So a couple of kids, how old are they?
Yeah, 2 girls, 10 and 12.
Any interest in the land? Not yet?
They're both really good helpers, and the eldest one has now told me she's interested in science and agriculture too, and I promise I did not push her. But, I don't think you can live on a farm without being curious about biology. Yeah. The kids know what legumes are. They know how the cycle of life and death. They understand disease management and reproduction. Even if they screw up their noses and think it's icky, So I think they definitely can appreciate what they have, particularly when they bring their townie friends home and they can see from their eyes what they've got here.
Yeah, lucky kids. So how many acres are we on here, and what are you running?
In total, we've got about 1,500 acres here. We're currently running Merinos with some cropping amongst it where we can as well. Yeah, I mean, Merinos are my comfort zone, I guess. I've been classing and selecting Merinos since I was 15, probably. But I guess it's also suited to the country that we're on. We're on some rough hills here, native country, not great fattening country on a lot of it, and stuff that's hard to fence. And Merinos look at one single plain wire and decide not to go anywhere. So, which is a little bit different to cattle and to crossies and dorpers and all the rest of it. So I guess there's a lot of farming activities you got to do with Merinos, and with the market the way it is at the moment, we do question whether we're going to stay in it forever. But for the moment, it does suit the landscape we're in. Yeah.
So looking over wool prices over the last 20 years, how do they compare to today?
Wool struggled quite a bit over the last 20 years. When we first got into it, it was a little bit better than it is now. And then we had a run of good years where we had some decent prices. And I'd say we're back to it being pretty steady at the moment. We're very vulnerable in the wool industry. We just, with exposure to what's happening overseas, particularly in China. And so when the rest of the world's not going well, wool's a luxury item, and so it doesn't go well. So, I think we'll be riding the bottom of the wave for a little while, but, when you look at the attributes of the product that we're producing, it's sustainable. It lasts. It's, there's some really great properties to it. It's not made of plastic.
Yeah.
The world is so full of plastic that I'd like to hope that the wool industry has got a strong place in the future.
Yeah. When wool prices are down, do you stockpile, or you've got mortgages to pay? Do you just sell whatever the prices are at the time?
We tend to stockpile a bit. We sell incrementally throughout the year. So, the wool brokers continuously ringing me up when we're getting a run, and we'll put on lines as we go. Yeah.
And do we still call merino wool fine wool?
Well, it depends on the merino wool. We're producing wool that's between 16.5 and 17.5 micron. So we'd be called fine wool.
Yeah.
And we're trying to keep below 18 micron because that gives us market choice. So if you keep it below that, you can go into anything from fine lingerie to jackets and suits and things like that as well, and jumpers. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So shearing times, fun, hectic, stressful, smooth sailing?
Shearing's always an interesting time. Often stressful. There's a lot going on at once. Fortunately, I have a workplace which is pretty flexible, so I can step out for a week I tend to do it on my own, as long as someone's got the kids
Mm.
and they're looked after school and before school, then it's usually not a problem. Yeah, it's about making sure that you've got a good team in the shed, and that's been hard some years, and yeah, I think it'll continue to be hard for a while somehow.
Are you feeding at all?
Yes, yep.
How do you control the nutrition and what are you feeding?
We're feeding a combination of barley and beans to some. We've been feeding some hay out to weaners as well. We've actually been pretty lucky this year in that we had some decent rain in December, which we had a new chicory pasture, and that's been great for the lambs. That ran out, of course, over January. That's probably one of the hardest things to manage when you're not on farm all the time, is when it gets to pinch points where you have to start feeding and managing and monitoring stock closely. That's probably when we get the most stressed.
Yeah.
Because, being both off farm, we're not always around when we need to. So a few late nights sometimes.
Yeah, I bet. Do you use a rotational grazing program?
I would say we rotationally graze. I wouldn't say it's a program.
Yeah.
I'd say, we're weighing up what the stock needs are at the time versus what's in the paddocks, and knowing that when we need to be doing strategic rests on pastures. It's also very much for the last 4 years, because we've had high summer rainfall, it's very much also about keeping pastures clean for lambing and a few things like that, and managing a drench program. So it's not an easy thing, and I don't think you can call it a program, but it is definitely something that we're continuously looking at in terms of where do we put stock when.
So on that note, do you do any containment feeding?
We have in the past. We had a flood here a few years ago, and we realised our containment yards were not in a good spot when they got flooded out. So we're in the process of rebuilding those, but we don't at the moment. So we've got a couple of paddocks that we've just sacrificed, where we've got, we know that there's going to be crop in there next year, and so they've been in those.
Well, do you store feed for dry times?
We try to. We don't really produce enough at the moment to store a heap. So we are reliant on the market a bit, the feed market, for our feed at the moment. So it's one of the areas that we're working on.
Any secrets to merino farming?
I think with merinos, it's good nutrition and timing is probably the things that I've learned over time, is particularly around fly strike management. Making sure they're crutched early is important. I think the other trick too with merinos is making sure you're classing your animals. If they're crutched, we generally don't have to worry about our ewes for fly strike, because they've got clean white wool. As soon as you get colour and other things into the wool, if you're not classing that out, that's when you get body strike.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you see a future in wool sheep?
Yeah, I do. I think as an industry we need stronger leadership. I worry about that the wool industry doesn't have a solid next generation coming on. There's a lot of expertise in the retiring generation, in my dad's age group. Whether we have those sufficient people to do merinos well in the future, I don't see many when I go to the auctions, the ram auctions, the ram sales.
Yeah.
I just don't see enough.
Is getting the right bloodline important for wool sheep?
Yeah, it is. Getting the right breed plan is probably more important. There's a whole heap of tools that to help you choose your genetics well. But the trick with merinos, particularly as we need them to be more dual purpose, is trying to get an animal that is easy maintenance, produces muscle, grows fast, but then also has a nice fibre. The biggest challenge with wool is that there's so many variants that you have to select for. To get the right combination is tricky.
Right. So you're not just sheep here, you're cropping also?
Yep.
And is it wheat, canola, or?
We do a lot of canola, a lot of wheat, and we've put in a lot of dual purpose crops in the past, because the main our areas are not big enough to really, do cropping well in terms of having big areas to harvest at this point in time. It's much more to supplement the livestock.
Uh-huh. So a little further south towards Holbrook is known for its good soil fertility. How is it here?
Depends on the block. We've got fairly crappy soils at the home block here where they're quite sandy and, a bit pipe clayish underneath, subsoil, acidicity possibly, and acid being hilly country that is not arable. So, we have constraints on production from a soil point of view here. On our other block, we purchased a block that had been pretty well run down, and so once we get on top of this soil acidity, it should be good.
How are you doing that?
A lot of lime.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I have a husband with a lot of spreaders.
Yeah.
So, there's been a lot of lime going on. There's been a lot of, trying to get over the annual ryegrass resistance as well in those paddocks has also been the other challenge. So, a lot of cropping to control weeds and things like that. But we're gradually getting better pastures over there on the paddocks that we need pastures in.
Yeah.
Just patience and lime and incorporation where we can.
And one day perhaps no synthetic fertilisers? Or will you need to incorporate that always, do you think, here?
I think we'll need to have synthetic fertilisers. The reason being we want to produce products. And every time we sell a bale of wool or every time we export a tonne of grain, we have nutrients leaving with that. And your system isn't a closed system. It doesn't make these nutrients out of anywhere. What you take out, you have to put back. Otherwise, you're mining.
Right.
So, if you're not replacing those nutrients somehow, yes, gradually over time, you will get less and less productive. You'll have less biology in the soil and so on. So, whether they'll be synthetic is the question.
Yeah.
At the moment, we haven't got a ready source of biological nutrients that can replace that. Not easily. There's some around, but not to the volumes we need and not to the way that we can put it, on efficiently. So ideally, you would use biological sources to replace those nutrients, but the reality is at the moment, we, as an industry, we can't replace synthetics with biological nutrients.
Yeah. So are weeds your biggest competitor?
Weeds are our biggest competitor. They'd be up there. Probably work is my biggest competitor. In other words, off-farm work. It would be nice to have more time in the day and more recreation time, but the reality is we have to make recreation around what we do on the farm here as best we can. We do have holidays. We do have time off on weekends and that sort of stuff. But
what I've learned about you so far, I can't imagine that.
there is some things we do. But the kids play weekend sport. They don't miss out. But I'd say time's our biggest competitor. And if we had more time, we'd have a better control of the weeds than we've got.
Talking about weeds then, is maintaining ground cover important to you?
Oh, it's essential. Absolutely essential. If I don't maintain ground cover, then I've got a bigger problem with weeds, absolutely. I mean, if you just have to look at saffron thistle, and I know some people don't think they're all that important, but these seeds last in the cell for 15 years, particularly for wool, but just for any livestock, it prevents grazing.
Yeah.
Here's the scientist in me coming out. I read a paper once that demonstrated that if you can keep 100% ground cover, you'll reduce saffron thistles by 95%.
Right.
So, my key goal is to have competitive perennial pastures across the whole farm, whether it's on the native country or the improved country. Obviously we'll have some cropping paddocks, but that's the aim, is everywhere that we can is improved competitive perennial pastures.
And right now in this area, it's a tough time for farmers, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
How are you going?
Oh, all right. Struggling. It'd be nice if, you've got your ideals of where you want to be and sometimes the actual doesn't quite meet it. We had a really dry winter this last winter and I think the whole district struggled really. I think it's just been a grind since last winter. We had a bit of a reprieve through spring, but it wasn't a long spring. We just didn't catch up in terms of ground cover, in terms of feed. I'm really hoping for an early autumn break. This last week with a couple of inches of rain has made a difference to at least put water back in the dams.
Yeah.
I think when you haven't got water, that's when it's hardest.
And it can be a little bit deceiving, can't it? We're looking over some greenery now, but perhaps it's not all good stuff.
Yeah, we keep the lawn green just so that we feel better about ourselves sometimes.
I've been on a lot of outback stations where there's hardly any ground cover right through the station, and yet they've got this little patch of green grass in front of their house. And someone said that is so important for them mentally, just to come home and see that little bit of greenery.
Yep, be able to walk on it barefoot and have that little bit of greenery, good for the head, but also keeps the dust down in the house. Yeah, it reduces the housework.
Any revegetation projects here?
Yes. We've fenced off some large areas against the national park. We have squirrel gliders in the creek down in front of us, and so we participated in a program to build connectivity down to the creek, which is awesome, and it's also protected our babblers. So we've fenced that off. We're letting that regenerate on its own. We have one area that we're going to be putting a few more trees into this year just to get a bit more diversity into that area, and a few trees to really help kick things along in one little patch. But we had a major project last year where we put a tree line up our entire southern side of one block, because we wanted to do three things. One was to have a double fence against the boundary for biosecurity. Another reason was to obviously improve aesthetics and improve biodiversity. We're also in a swift parrot area, so we want to help build, have a few more golden wattles in the system so that we can build feed for them. And then the third thing is for protection from the south, for wind and for shelter for the animals and that sort of thing. So it was for multiple reasons, and I think where you can get multiple benefits out of re-veg like that, you should definitely try. It also connected up a few areas of remnant veg that wasn't big enough to do anything on its own, but now it'll have, hopefully the trees some of them are almost 1.5 meters, 2 meters tall now, after a year or so. So they're going really well. But hopefully it'll mean that they're all connected up now to a farm dam at the bottom of the hill.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing that the squirrel gliders are down there. Do you take the kids down there over night time and watch them?
When we can, when it's warm enough. We have been out spotlighting for them in the past, and go down and count the possums in the trees. Can't always see a squirrel glider, but we have found a couple caught on the barbed wire fence on the driveway before. So we've swapped the barb down lower now as a result, but we had to get the welding gloves because these things can bite.
Yes.
We took it off and fixed it up, and yes, they're back up the tree.
Oh, good stuff. Do you have a carbon number, and is it important to you?
I do have a carbon number. It's rubbery at the moment. I need to go back and fix stock numbers, and I've got a few mobs that I haven't yet included. Is it important to me? Not yet, would be the short answer. And I know, given my profession, that's the wrong answer, but it is the reality. At the moment, there's no carrot, there's no stick for carbon.
It's not a marketing tool yet?
No, not yet. If I was vertically integrated and I was doing something with my product in terms of trying to market it myself, it probably would be important then. And I'd probably have a whole marketing campaign talking about my remnant vegetation and my biodiversity credentials and all sorts of stuff. The reality is I don't have time. And most farmers, because of the need for scale, don't have time either. Through my professional job, I guess, the thing that I've learnt is that you need to look at carbon as an efficiency metric. So it's on its own, it's a meaningless number, but when you're looking at it in terms of how much methane you're producing, because you've got to remember methane's a waste product from the livestock. Okay? So the amount of methane per kilogram of product that you're producing is a measure of efficiency for your production system. So the more you can improve that metric, and that could be through turning off your livestock faster, producing more product, those sorts of things, the more you can improve that number, the more efficient your production system is. So at the moment, the best value you can get from a carbon account is as a benchmarking tool.
Yeah. How does sheep and cattle compare with their carbon number and what they output?
They're both ruminants. They're pretty much the same.
Are they?
Yeah, not in terms of on a per animal basis, but a per DSE or a livestock unit basis. Yeah, they both produce methane.
Right. I was hoping you were going to say sheep might have been a bit closer or easier to get to a carbon neutral than cattle.
Look, I think Merinos are the hardest to get to a carbon neutral because you're not actually producing them to sell off. You're trying to maintain an animal to produce 5, 6, 7 kilos of product. Whereas your other systems, you're growing a calf or a lamb purely for the meat trade, and the sooner you get them off, the more efficient you are. Whereas Merinos are slow growing. The genetically they're different, and so they're probably, even though it's probably about 60% of the fibre that you're producing is pure carbon, it's not much. And so yes, in a way you're trapping carbon into a product that can be retained. Just like trees, if you're growing them for wood production, that wood, once it's harvested and put into a building, is captured. Wool's the bit the same. Okay, so once it's harvested, it's put into a jumper, it's captured.
Yeah.
It's it's not going anywhere until you recycle it or put it in the bin, or it goes into landfill or something, and then it's going back into the soil. But really the volume of carbon that you're putting in, that you're capturing per animal isn't enough to really offset much of the product.
How interesting. I've got stacks to learn on carbon yet. So you and your husband Dan started this farm, and it wasn't just handed to you. So this must be difficult, and you do need to take on off-farm work. What does Dan do? Should we ask him? He's just here.
Nothing much. Yeah, you could. No, he's constantly fixing tractors. So he has his own spreading and spraying contracting business. So he goes further out west and works on large corporate and family farms out there, contracting for spreading, spraying, and anything else, harvest work around tractors. So we have our own machinery, and we employ a couple of people a year at key times to help him keep those machines busy working throughout the broadacre cropping area.
Yeah.
So very different to me.
Well, I was going to talk about you now. You have a very important role at Holbrook Landcare Network. And for our listeners, we are talking to the CEO of Holbrook Landcare Network. And this organisation is a highly respected landcare network with a great team taking on many amazing projects. And Alison, if it's okay, I think there's a whole new episode here talking about the Holbrook Landcare Network, if you'll allow me to chat to you about that one day.
Sure, not a problem. Happy to.
All right, Alison, now we've got some off-the-wall questions. This is the fun part. Answer as many as you like and tell me to shut up whenever you like. What's your favourite tool or piece of machinery here on the farm?
I'm not allowed to say the husband, am I?
Yes, you can.
Oh, the dog. I'm between good dogs at the moment, but when you have, this one has her moments. She's rolling around scratching her back at the moment, looking very useless. When you have a dog doing the right thing, it's beautiful to watch, you know, in terms of them mustering sheep and all the rest of it. And I remember being in the yards during COVID and I was feeling crook and the dog just knew, and she just did the most amazing job working the sheep and getting them exactly where we needed to get the job done, and she just knew.
Wow.
So they can be a really great mate.
Yeah. But the dog sensed that you were a bit off.
Oh, totally. Yep, she knew.
Wow. If your sheep could talk, what do you think they'd say about the way you run things on the farm?
Oh, I'd hope they think that I'm not one of those erratic people that tears around making them run too hard. Generally, they're pretty calm. I've been told I have calm sheep, so maybe I don't yell enough in the yard.
No, I think that's good.
Yeah, so hopefully they don't think I'm too bad. Yeah, I've got a potty that comes up and nibbles my pocket every time I go into the paddock with him, and he and his mate look after the lambs for me, so they tend to teach them what to do. But yeah, hopefully they look at me and go, oh yeah, she's back, she's going to give us some feed or move us to a new paddock or whatever. She's not going to do too bad of things to us today.
What's the most unexpected thing you've encountered on the farm?
Oh, I don't know. Every time I go down the paddock, there's something different.
Yeah.
I mean, I think seeing the range of wildlife that we have is always fun. Like I just had 2 echidnas the other day right near the gate and come say good day. We've had lace monitors, we've got all sorts of things popping around here. So I think that's the fun bit. I get a lot of pleasure out of seeing native plants pop up in the paddock and in the areas that we've fenced off. We've got grass trees up the back, and every now and then we'll go for a walk up there and see the orchids in flower. And I've got a thing for chocolate lilies. If you've never smelt a chocolate lily, you've got to do it. It smells like Cadbury chocolate. You go out there at 10 o'clock on a spring morning and it's just amazing.
Beautiful. Now Dan might be able to help us with this next question. If you could give your farm a theme song, what would it be?
I don't know whether I want to answer that one.
Depends what mood I'm in.
Yeah.
Don't stop believing.
Don't stop believing. That's probably not a bad one.
If you could time travel 100 years into the future, what do you think farming will look like then? And do you think wool sheep will be still part of it?
I hope wool sheep are still part of it in 10 years at the moment.
Yeah. We do a bit of innovation stuff with Holbrook Land Care, and just the other day we had an ag tech expo, and it was showing us all the technologies that are now or about to become available. And so, things like automatic sensors on watering points are going to become mainstream. I think virtual fencing is going to become much more mainstream. I'm so excited. We've got a project about to start on that. Mapping from satellite and connecting to your phone so that you can get a measure of how much feed you've got in the paddock before you even step into it. Some of those things are going to be there. The biggest question is, are we still going to have shearers doing the same thing? And I said, 100 years' time, God, we still could.
Yeah.
Who knows? That's probably the biggest risk, is if we haven't innovated in terms of our harvest system, like effectively to a commercial scale in terms of our harvest system. The biggest innovation in the harvest of wool in the last 150 years has been going from a narrow to a wider handpiece. So, that's the question really, is can we get that right?
Is there a quirky family tradition you've started on the farm?
Oh.
Dan doesn't go out and do rain dances, does he, without any clothes on or anything silly like that?
You might have been getting close a few weeks ago. I think we're at that stage of life where it's just busy. Kids are doing so much sport now, and just collapse when you get a chance to have a bit of time. We tend to have Sunday nights, cook pizzas and play music and stuff like that.
Nice.
If we're all home.
Yeah.
Often for Father's Day or something like that, we'll go make a little fire with a plough disc barbecue down on the creek and go have a barbecue. That's probably the kids' favourite thing, isn't it? Go down there and have a picnic and just hang out.
Family time.
You don't need anything. You don't need phones. You don't need toys. You don't need any of that rubbish.
Yeah. Have you had a run-in with a particularly cheeky animal?
Probably have, but I've forgotten all of them. I had a rat bite me on the thumb once.
Bats.
Oh, my bat story. Yes. So I don't know whether I want to tell the public this one.
Go for it.
I had a small 10 or a dozen lambs that I needed to crutch one day, and I had them over the wool shed, and I put them into the catching pen, and the catching pens, the shed's about 90 years old or something like that, and the latch for the gate is just a wood panel that slots into a groove in the post. And I've gone to close the gate, and I've heard this crunch as I've pushed it into the panel, and I've pulled it back out, and this micro bat's fallen on the ground. And the thing's quite healthy, except it's got a broken wing. And my youngest daughter was with me, and we were looking at this thing, and I ended up getting a towel and picking it up, and we're, thinking, what do we do now? We thought, we'll put it into a little cage and everything. We'll give it a day or so and just see what happens. And so I'm here handling this thing and giving it some water, and we found it likes wet dog food, and so we're feeding it that, and it's eating it off a matchstick and all this sort of stuff, and it was doing fine. And we thought, oh God, this thing's going to survive. So we thought we better look up on the internet what to do, and I called up my colleagues at Holbrook Land Care, and they said, I don't know whether we can heal a broken bat wing. Anyway, so I Googled it and got on the Wires page, and the first thing it said at the top was, do not handle the bat.
Oh, no. The kids had as well?
No, the kids hadn't. Fortunately, it was just me. So as a result, we had a crazy bat woman come out from Wires. She was lovely, but slightly crazy, as I'm sure bat women tend to be. So this poor old bat had to be taken away, and they had to extract part of its brain to check it didn't have rabies. So you can imagine what happened to the bat after looking after it for a few days. And then I had a series of vaccinations for the next 3 months to make sure I didn't catch lyssavirus. So word of advice, never pick up a microbat. It's really not a good idea, but this thing was so ugly, it was cute. It was, we were all very curious about it, but yes, the consequences for handling were not nice. But I'm not sick, so there you go.
Oh, what a great story and a great message. Thanks, Alison. Now, my last question, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I think I'm happy where I am somehow. We live in the best country. I have a beautiful view every morning over my coffee, so I'm pretty happy where I am.
Well, Alison, that wraps up this episode. I do want to come back and talk to you about the Holbrook Land Care Network on your role there. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege to talk to you and have this morning out here with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What a clever lady. I thoroughly enjoyed my chat with Alison today. And on a personal note, I had such a fun time visiting Alison and her husband Dan. Interestingly, I was introduced to Dan just before we started recording, and we share the same surname, but had no idea we were related. By the end of our recording with Alison and a little research from Dan, he'd figured out we were cousins, and he knew my immediate family. Small world. And I have to say, Dan is a top bloke. What a win. So next week, Alison will be back with us, but this time as the CEO of Holbrook Land Care Network, a fantastic organisation with a well-earned reputation for its work in agriculture, land conservation and community. We dive into the adaptive farming systems, soil acidity, the challenges of agriculture, and much more. It's a conversation you definitely won't want to miss. Until then, keep your hands dirty and your spirits high.